Welcome back, everyone. And thanks again to Synovus for sponsoring our lunch and to Great Events for preparing it. Let's just give them a round of applause. I sure hope everyone's taking advantage of the networking opportunities and meeting some new people and exchanging some business cards. Our next speaker is Downey. Anne is a professional engineer and comes to us from Statoil, Canada, where she's Vice President of Operations. In this capacity, Anne is responsible for the resource development and ongoing operations of the company's onshore facilities. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Anne Downey.
Just adjusting it. Can you all see me? No? I'm going to start off with a little story. Just imagine this. You're 11 years old, and you and your 5 sisters and your mother eat in the kitchen. And your brothers, 5 brothers, and your dad eat in the dining room. Now, this is what we called mealtime segregation. And the men always got served first. Always. So you can imagine what was left for the women. Pickings were pretty slim. So I was 11 years old, and this was starting to get a little tiresome, especially when those chicken legs went by, and I had never had a chicken leg. So one day I go in and I pick up my youngest brother. Remember, I have 5 brothers, 3 of them younger than me. So I picked him up and I carried him out and I put him in the kitchen and I took his spot. And nobody objected. My parents, my brothers, my sisters, nobody objected. And I think on a level I did know intuitively that I would never be invited to that table. I had to go in there and take some action. And that was the action that I took. And when I went in there, not only was the food better, and there's more of it, but the conversation was different, and it was so much more interesting. So I should, is this thing working? I was just going to show the pictures. This was the ladies' table. The men's table. And again, the conversation was extremely interesting in the dining room. We had interesting arguments, and we talked about different subjects. And basically, I would say that the years I spent at the boys' table in my home really prepared me for this table. You can see all the old boys are still there at this table. And in a lot of ways, my family life was very much of I was like a microcosm of the work world that I entered in the late 1970s. Very, very simple, very similar. And also in a lot of ways, when I look back on it, I think my parents didn't love the boys in the family any more than they loved the girls. There was no doubt of that. They didn't. But what they were, the way these practices had evolved, basically was family tradition, probably came from their backgrounds in fishing and farming. So that was where the segregation came from. And so to a large degree, this was also similar to the work world that I went into. And I would say a lot of things have changed in the last 40 years. We've seen a lot more women are in the workforce. A lot more, certainly a lot of the prejudices and barriers have come down, or they're a lot less overt than they were back in the day, back in my day when prejudice was real prejudice. And, but things are still not perfect. There are still things in the workforce right now that are impediments, but they're a lot more subtle. There are things somebody came up with a fancy name. You may have heard this already. I didn't, unfortunately, I couldn't attend most of the sessions this morning. but you may have heard this second-generation bias. Little work practices, which tend to exclude women. What they're calling, and this is a real nice trendy, calling the glass obstacle course, not the glass ceiling anymore. Little practices which are, you know, there are things in the back of people's minds which are saying, well, they exclude you from certain things. They're not, you know, they're really, it's probably even in the subconscious of many people, and some of it's organizational. Some of it's assumptions that are made on your part by people that may not know you, may not know what your ambitions truly are. So, what do you do about it? You know, there are a lot of things that have changed, but it's going to take a long time. And you can't wait. You really can't wait for it. So what are the things that you can do? You can do things like, and I think these are very important events, women's conferences, women in engineering and science organizations, groups like Catalyst, the work that's going on in universities around improving leadership and opportunities for women. Those are all very good things. But I think you have to also take action. You can't wait for somebody to ask you to that table. You have to go and do something about it. And I think what you can do is what you can control. And you can control your own life. And you can control the things that you need to. You need to get out there and become leaders. You need to have enough of you, and we need to have enough of you out there so that we start seeing the critical mass that we need. We need to have more women as role models. And you have to be good at leadership. And leadership comes, you know, that you can boil it down. I found this, actually, preparing for this talk, very intellectually challenging. And it also gave me a little break from technical things. Technical things, operations things, budgets, they're really interesting. But the leadership is an area that can fill huge, well, you could probably fill a small city with the books that have been written on leadership. And thinking about it, I thought, well, I need to distill this down because the rules of PowerPoint, you can only have 3 or 4 dot points on a page. Now, I am probably breaking that rule here a little bit, but I have distilled down leadership into 3 things, 3 essentials. Starting with know yourself. I think this is really important. You need to know who you are, what drives you, and you also need to know where you're going. And you need a plan to get there. And I think that those things are not always intuitive. And if they are, that's not good enough. I think you need to have an intentional approach to it. You need to be very concrete, very specific about those things. Very, very simple. Just 3 little things. But many times we don't really know ourselves, or maybe we change with where we want to go. But what I'm saying, we need to, at certain times, stand back, look at it. And what are the essentials? I'm going to go into a little bit of depth in knowing yourself. Now, this picture, actually, this is more for the men. Men look at themselves in the mirror. They do see that lion. Women are like a lion, and you look in the mirror and you see a pussycat. So you need to reverse this, but I couldn't find the other picture, so I had to go with this one. So, self-awareness. This is really important. Know what you look like. Be self-aware. Think about it. Are you one of those people that come into a boardroom and you kind of sneak in there and try to look small and you creep on the edges of the side of the room and you don't take a place at the table? Even if they're there, do you move up to the table or do you stay on the side? It's really important. Your body language says a lot about you. People pick up signals looking at you. They will say, you're not confident, or you're scared, or we can't trust you because you're sending out the wrong signals that maybe you don't trust that what you're going to say. They may start discounting it. And then you might run into that thing, you had a good idea, and then you said it from the side of the room, and then the guy next to you, the guy sitting in front of you at the table picks up your idea, and all of a sudden it's his idea. I'm sure you've all heard about that syndrome. It's very real. But I think it's really important to know your body language. There is a great TED Talk. Are you all familiar with TED? There's a great talk by Amy Cuddy, a Harvard professor, called Body Language Shapes Who You Are. If you get nothing out of my little talk, go and look that up. It is very compelling and very powerful, and she says it a lot better than I do. Basically what she says, fake it till you make it. You may not feel confident. Go in and look confident. You don't have to be confident. When I was a young engineer, and when I was in the corporate world, and I was working with the CEO's office, and I would come in there, and my mantra wasn't fake it till you make it, was the bluff is everything. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be confident. I'm going to bluff my way through it. And that really worked. After about a few months, I went in and I really believed it. I still didn't know everything. And I thought, well, who does know everything? You can always get back to them. So it's really important on that, to know your body language. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. And you're always being judged. I think you need to really know that you are always being judged. You may not think that, but in the corporate world, whoever you are, you're being judged on the results you get when you walk in. And it's maybe not even, people aren't even probably aware of it. But you are, and if you're a minority of a woman in a corporate world, you probably get a little more scrutiny than the average guy wearing a suit like mine. Probably wouldn't say wear the same shirt. But. Ambitions. You need to be very clear on what your ambitions are. Because if you want to be the CEO of an energy company, the path to that, your building blocks, they're going to be very different than if you want to be the best specialist in fluid mechanics. So you need to really be clear on what you want. And you need to accept your responsibility with confidence. Whatever you do, you say, I can take on a job. I look at many men who've gone into new positions. You see the technical and the leadership qualifications. They look at it and they go, oh, yeah, I can do all that. Because they're very confident. And then I would look at them and say, oh, they can meet 30% of that. But when they look at it, they see something different because they're very confident and they believe they can take those responsibilities. Many women aren't, for some reason, they have this imposter syndrome. They are probably hugely, hugely capable, but don't always accept that with confidence. You can get it. So you got to spend an extra full weekend boning up on something. Get in there and be prepared. Take it with confidence. And really like what you do. Don't go out and become a leader in a field that's not you, that doesn't ring your bell all the time. Because if you're going to be a leader in a field that's boring or that is just not aligned with your values, it's hard. You will have to put in a lot of hard work and time. The price doesn't feel as high when you're doing something you really like. So, like what you do. Give feedback. Feedback is very important. What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? Don't really worry about those weaknesses too much, but focus on those strengths. Strengths are really important because you can leverage those to go wherever you want to go. Oh, and this is my favorite, mental toughness. I've observed a lot of women over the years. In fact, when I went into engineering, there were actually a few of us, not many of us, well, there's only one that was left, that was me, in my graduating class. The others probably didn't have the mental toughness, well, most of them, the other four didn't have the mental toughness to get over the first week. And part of that, it's tough. You know, they walked in there, and of course, we got hazed and harassed, and, you know, it was a pretty rough week. But I think these were all very intelligent women, so they went off and they did things like medicine and architecture, you know, so low intelligence stuff. But they didn't really, they couldn't handle some of the, I would say, the abuse that you got at that point in time in an engineering faculty. So mental toughness is really important. And don't take it personally. I'm going to share another little personal story. This is one of my favorites. And it had a really big impact on me when I was in engineering and when I was in school. I was 18 years old. I was on my second work term. I was in my hometown. I worked in a pulp and paper plant. And that was me and 500 men every day. And they were cruel. They were really cruel. It was sexual and physical harassment, bullying, you know, throwing water on me from 3 floors up. Just really, really nasty stuff. And I was coming home, and I was getting angry and angrier all the time. Chip on my shoulder was getting pretty big. And I was walking home one evening, you know, in a very angry mood. And I was realizing that a lot of my anger was spilling over into my family life. Now, those 5 brothers, they were still around, and I hated them. I was starting to hate them just because they had the wrong plumbing. No other reason, you know, because they're generally pretty decent people. But I was getting angry, and I was walking home, and all of a sudden, it was like a bolt out of the air. I had an epiphany. I haven't had many of those. And this is my first big one that I had. And what I looked at was, I had a flash of my life, 30 years stretching out, and I saw this chip on my shoulder getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I thought, whoa, I gotta make a decision. I'm standing there in front of somebody's house, and I'm thinking, I have to make a decision. Do I drop out of engineering? Or I have to have an adjustment, basically an attitude adjustment. Since I'm here, you know, I chose the latter. I did get a mental attitude adjustment in what I was dealing with, because to a large extent, it was no different than the segregation back in my childhood, where I was a bit segregated. You know, there was the boys' table and the girls' table. So I thought to myself, they can't help it. I can't take it personally. And so I decided I would put my efforts into adapting, into protecting myself, coping, and just doing what I want. Not focusing on this. I couldn't control what those 500 guys, but I could make sure I walked places where they weren't going to drop those buckets of water on me. So basically, that's what I put my energy in. And I think it's really important. There will be sometimes systemic, subtle pressures that may be difficult, but you can't fix them. The only thing you can fix is how you cope with them. So, and I think it's really important just to look at that. There are a lot of important leadership attributes. I'm going to go through this, and it's going to scare the heck out of you, but I'm not going to talk about them all. And they're all important. But I am going to talk about 2, the ones in red. Because even though you have to be good in all these other things, there are 2 really important ones. And the reason I put these out there is because they resonate with me on a personal level, and I'll tell you why. 1, challenging constructively. You have to be very careful how you challenge in an organization. It's probably one of the most dangerous areas for being derailed if you're a woman. So you have to think about, how do you tell your boss, tell your boss's boss, or tell somebody else in another department that their ideas are all wrong, or they're wrong, you know. I mean, so it's, or you might have that view. So I think it's really important that you think about how do you approach a situation. Do it very intentionally, do it very mindfully, and think about it first. If you are going to take that risk, think about how do you position something. You can be too direct. So it's very important that you craft it and think about it. And derailment, yes, I have personal experience with that in 2 very significant cases. So it does make a big difference to you in your career. So pitfall. The second one in red is collaborating across boundaries. And we have a very complex world. It was complex when I graduated long, long time ago, but I think it's even more complex now. We're a lot more global. We have a lot of diversity in our workplaces. And we also have, probably most of you here work in very complex matrix organizations where the authority and responsibility is quite diffuse within these organizations. So being able to manage that is very important. Women tend to intuitively do this quite well. So again, build on your strengths, but do it well, and in these 2 things, know your organization, know the politics of it, know the unwritten rules. It's very important. And of course, be good at all the rest of it too. Okay, you see the guy on the right. Most of you should know this guy, but I'm not going to put out a quiz. It is Napoleon, of course. And you say, why do you have Napoleon up here? Well, I'll tell you why. I was going to craft my talk on military history. I love military history. And my colleague, an HR colleague, she was subtly directing me to maybe talk more about my own personal experience, which I have to admit, this is the first time I've ever publicly done that. But I thought, well, there's so many interesting military leaders in history. So anyway, he's a residue from what I had originally planned. But I put him in here too. He was one of the world's greatest leaders, absolutely. He did incredible things. He was a very early achiever. He came from relative obscurity to become, basically, to challenge the status quo of a whole continent. He was the emperor of France. They didn't even have emperors for 1,000 years or so. He was an emperor by the age of 35. Plus all his relatives were running the kingdoms and queendoms of the rest of Europe. He made a big difference. He also was very collaborative. He was a very great leader. He had lots of weaknesses as well. He certainly wasn't perfect. But he left a legacy and a mark that's very impressive. I put him up here because it would be a good idea for you folks to maybe study some of the characteristics of some of the great leaders. There are a lot of good lessons that can be learned from them. And it's about strengths. And I'm going to just move on thinking of that. And I'm going to throw something back for some little audience participation. Because, like Napoleon, huge strengths. I think he knew them. He had some weaknesses that he didn't pay attention to, which is why he met his Waterloo. But I thought it would be worthwhile because I was told that this should be participative, interactive, and fairly interesting, if possible. So I'm going to ask you folks at the table to spend just 5 minutes talking about your strengths. No weaknesses, just talk about your strengths. And then maybe a few brave volunteers can talk about in general, what did you learn, or what were the general trends? So 5 minutes, starting now.